G'day everyone and welcome to episode number 19 of the Australian Rock Show, Oz Rock's loudest and proudest music podcast. My name is Dennis Gray from the Rockin' and Rollin' Gray Brothers. Today is Friday the 15th of May 2015 when this show is being recorded. Boss are one of the finest hard rock bands which Australia has produced. Back in the early 80s, they were one of the hardest working bands around, and their 1984 album, Step On It, is one of the best rock albums to ever come out of Australia. Their distinctive sound was due in part to the powerful vocals of frontman Craig Csongrady. Craig has spent most of his life producing melodic, hard-driving rock and roll, first with Boss, then later with BB Steel, a world-class outfit who are still out there sounding better than ever. Recently, on the 13th of May, we chatted to Craig about his amazing rock and roll ride. An interview which we will hear in a moment, but as per usual, we're going to get in the mood with a tune. From 1984, here are Boss with some kick-ass rock and roll. Craig, welcome to the Australian Rock Show.
Great, welcome. Great having you.
Congratulations on the Resurrection album, mate. There are some world-class tunes on that album, such as Waiting For You, Follow, Made Up Your Mind and Wildflower, for example. How has that album sold for you?
Look, personally, the album hasn't technically been released only through the Goldwing Records and BB Steel website and through AOR Heaven in Germany, but we haven't actually done any campaign to release it properly here in Australia because we're looking for a decent tour to get on. And rock tours are few and far between. You know, we kind of fall in between a rock and a hard place, no pun intended, but we're not the typical, we're not an indie band and we're not we're a rock act, you know, a pure rock act. And it's only a couple of those bands really that get around and tour like Dead Daisies, and that's really about all, and some of the overseas acts. But we'd really like to jump on a couple of those tours and open. You know, even though we've been around a long time, we've got a lot more history than the Dead Daisies and a lot more albums out than bands like that. They seem to have a lot more of a budget to pull the big venues and the promos. So we're waiting for something like that. If any of the bands out there, you know, have got the nerve to actually have us on that bill, because BBs are known to kick ass.
Sure, and
off a lot of the main acts.
Well, there's rumblings that AC/DC are looking for a former Australian band or someone who with a bit of history to support on the Australian tour. So I think fans should get behind BB Steel or maybe even Boss. That's wishful thinking. And,
Boss and BB Steel, basically the same. It was the same band. It was just we had to have a name change because of a lot of legal stuff and a lot of confusion with Boss being Springsteen at the time. We'd be doing venues and people in especially regional areas like RSLs be saying, "Hey, where's Bruce?" And we're talking, we were kids, and we go, "Bruce, what?" And the agent at the time, Richard Wild, which is Richard Wilkins today, he was, people would say, Boss, that's Springsteen. He'd say, that's Springsteen's backup band. And we wondered why we're getting $5,000 and $10,000 guarantees as 18, 19-year-olds. And we're scratching our heads, and then we realised that, okay, we're being sold as something else. I mean, the things that go on in the music industry just curl your ears. But so there was a bit of that, and there was the Boss Effects pedals and Boss Pro from American clothing label, you know, and we were getting mixed up with a lot of things. So when we decided to start doing a second album, which is the On the Edge album, our manager said maybe, you know, change the name slightly or whatever. And I said, well, why don't we call ourselves Beg Boris Steel, because that's all we seem to be doing, you know. And so we changed it to, well, it was Beg Boris Steel, and we thought, well, let's shorten it a bit, BB Steel, you know, and we changed it to that. But a lot of people think, Boss and BB Steele two different bands. Well, there were, because Kevin Pratt and myself were the writers, and Kevin was original boss player. There was the original drummer. I think it was only who would have been different? No, we even had a bass. The whole band, I think it was a guitar player. That was about it that we'd changed, and at that time. But we also changed labels. Went from RCA to Phonogram, and that was about it. So I was promoted by two different labels. So it was.
Well, Craig, I do want to talk about your current day activities for BB Steele, but I also want to dig into your past, if I may, including your formative years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you grew up in the working class town of Elizabeth, which from the mid-50s was the destination for many migrants and was the musical breeding ground for many prominent Australian artists, including Glenn Shorrock, Doc Newson, Jimmy Barnes and John Swan. And you used to knock around with Swanee, didn't you?
Not really knock around. Swanee, as a young kid, I used to see Jimmy and John perform in bands around Elizabeth, and I was about 13, 14, and I used to rock up to. There used to be a gig at Elizabeth Town Centre. It was called the Octagon, and in my high school days, those bands would be playing at our school events, and look, I was always into rock. I was into bands like Zepp, Free, Bad Company. I'd kind of, at the age of 14, I was about 15 actually, I joined a local Elizabeth band and did covers, Free covers and Deep Purple covers, and but John and Jimmy, I met Jimmy very young. He would have been, I don't know, he would have been 19, something like that. And I even gave him a lift to a gig once. I remember as soon as I got my license, and
wow.
And I remember John, hanging around, doing gigs around the same area, and I was very influenced by those guys and by the music that they were following as well. It seemed to be the British thing, and because it was a lot of English migrants in Elizabeth, and they were all into bands like Free, Bad Company, The Who, and it was a great influence. It was very blues based rock.
And of course, the BB Steele tune Lizzie Town. You wrote about Elizabeth, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I left Elizabeth very young, about 17, 18, and I wanted to pursue a music career, and I knew that I'd had to move. So Laurie Marlowe and myself, Laurie was bass player, ended up in heaven, and which we formed a band in Sydney after we left Adelaide. We put an Ampeg SVT in the back of a Morris 1100, and we had a dole check each, I think, and we said, let's get out of town and do a band in Sydney. And we drove to Sydney. You imagine a big Ampeg. It was weighing down the back of the bumper bar was almost dragging along the main highway because it was so heavy with our luggage and the Ampeg, and it's a 8x10 box in the back. Don't even know how we got it in the back, but we went to Sydney, and I happened very quickly because I was writing some songs and got a guy called Michael Browning, who was AC/DC's manager and NHS's manager at that time, liked what I was doing and signed us up as management. And we kind of went from there and started putting together a band, which we didn't have a name for at the time. It was with Kelly from Heaven, and the band eventually was called Heaven, but I'd actually left and had a Warner Brothers poach me for, and actually really helped me change a lot of direction, Warner Brothers music, and put together the band Boss. And they loved what they heard, but with the Boss sound.
Can we go back a little bit before that? One of the key characteristics of both BB Steele and particularly Boss's sound was your high-pitched vocals. Did you take singing lessons, or at some point when you were a teenager you thought, wow, I've got a pretty decent vocal range?
No, I didn't. What happened? Some of the songs I was doing as a young lad covers were songs from Rush, and it was always and listening to Judas Priest and Rob Halford, and majorly tried to get those, ranges, and I reckon I blacked out a few times trying to get them as a young kid, and always try to mimic it. And eventually, I think through torturing my voice and persistence, I actually got there. I used to not be able to talk for days, trying to do it. And I think touring with the band, and we did a lot of gigs back then. And I think because of the experience, we were doing sometimes 7 to 9 days, 9 gigs a week back when rock was, king.
Oh.
And, all around Sydney and right around the country, actually. And I think it was just persistence, experience, start to learn the craft. And it was... Back then, I suppose my balls hadn't dropped. I don't know what it was, but I can still get.
So were you in? Notes. Were you in any bands before Boss?
Yeah. Well, it was basically a cover band, which I didn't like covers. But we, when I was about 16, what were we called? Dust and Ashes or something like that. And I can't even remember. And it was very, very young, like high school stuff, and then put a band together with a bunch of guys called Relic. We had, we did mostly Rush, Judas Priest songs, and so, that kind of helped me, squeeze that vocal out. And we did a couple of originals, not too many. That lasted a while. It sounded fantastic, actually, the band. A great drummer and guitar player, very tight act. And it was time really to that stage, because I loved writing and I loved doing, the band thing, and wanted to really just develop myself as something original singer. So, I thought best thing to do, because in Adelaide at the time, most guys were doing covers, to get some bucks out of it. And that really didn't interest me. I really wanted to come, progressive in writing and doing our own thing. So I kind of moved to Sydney to find like-minded musicians.
So we're talking around about 79. You formed Boss with Kevin Pratt. Is that correct?
It was 1980, 81.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I remember I'd moved. I was in King's Cross, and some guys contacted me. Heard you're in town. Good singer. You want to form a band? I think it was a guy called Theo, and drummer Theo. He's actually still around, and he's played with a lot of bands. And he rocked up with a guy with a caftan on, and who was Kevin Pratt, this young guy. He would have been 16, from Wollongong, and I'd Dapto actually, just out of Wollongong. And I thought, okay, I'd love to hear you play. And when I heard this guy play, my face melted. I could not believe that a 16-year-old could play with so much maturity. Even though I was still young, I just knew that, oh my God, he sounds like, Michael Schenker or anyone. It was like all those, all the greats all in one. And we started jamming and started writing together, Kevin and I, way back then. And that's where, Kevin and I mean, if you hear him on the original Boss stuff, he was like 17, 18. Wow. And you listen to the playing. I texted him the other day and just said, mate, I hear stuff. And I actually get welled up, because I can't believe that a guitar player existed and still exists in this country of that caliber that hasn't made it right to the top.
I've said it before, and we're going to have Kevin on the show sometime this year, one of the most underappreciated guitar players which Australia has produced, no doubt. So you're in Sydney with Kevin, and it's the early 80s, and you put the band together, and through hard work and constant gigging, the band build a profile with some of your best performances at Bondi's Astra Hotel. Many bands often say that their best days were before they were signed and they were trying to make it. Is that how you look back on those days in the early 80s?
With our, you could say that a bit. Just quick history. We were unsigned for only a little while as far as publishing goes. Mm-hmm. And I think we filled in for the choir boys. I think Mark Gable was sick, and we got a call that day from Harbour and said, would you like to play down at the Manly Hotel? And I said, yeah, for sure. So we went down there, and I'm not joking, there was 5 people. And out of those 5, there was a gentleman there with a woman, and just watching the band, and came up to us later and said, I'm the managing director of Warner Brothers. I come to see the Choir Boys, but they're not on, but here's my business card. And I thought it was a load of crap, but, it actually was all real. And it was John Brommel from Warner Chappell, and he signed us up. Ever since then, I've still been with Warner as my publishers. He helped change our whole lives and careers, basically. He helped us so much with advance money to keep us alive, because we were all on the dole and really struggling, but we were gigging nearly every day of the week, but it was costing us, and, petrol and that, even though things didn't cost as much back then, but we were young, and it really, we were just doing it because of total 100% love and drive for just doing rock. But what the question was, we ended up getting a deal with RCA Records. Now, the band sounded, if you can imagine, live, it was a cross between AC/DC and, say, Led Zeppelin and some of the classic heavy metal bands, a bit Priestish here and there. But it was had a very classic Australian rock sound. And what happened, we signed with RCA, and a producer was brought in who really started to, wanted to change us to get us more commercial,
Was that Eddie Hansen?
Eddie Hansen was brought in.
Okay.
Eddie wasn't experienced enough to be a producer at the time. Kevin and I wrote the songs, and I think, to our credit, even though you're like 18 years old, you have an idea of what you want to sound like, because you're the guys that are writing it. Then along comes someone that comes in and wants to put their stamp on it, and they're, to their credit too, they're trying to keep everything to budget and in line, but they haven't got a clue what we're about. They haven't even seen us play live. So they're trying to turn what we already had, like turn this rock band into something slick, because they're musos. They're not rock dudes. They're like muso that play the muso club, that do jazz fusion and all that, and they're trying to make us sound like something we're not. And so there was always conflict, because we're not going to sing like this, or I'm not going to sing like that, and the drummer's not going to play all these rudiments. And what we started to, we argued, and we went into the studio to do the Step On It album, and we ended up with a guy called Richard Lush, because Eddie Hansen, that didn't work. And Richard Lush was another guy that was, he worked with the Beatles, and it was like, oh, okay, you're not really a rock dude. And, tends to kick drum sounded like someone was throwing cotton wool balls against the kick, and it was just all wrong. It was all wrong, and I ended up, facing the head guy at the record company and said, guys, I don't know what you're trying to do. You signed us on a certain sound, and you're trying to change us. Why don't you go down North Shore, where all the bands there, they all sound like what you want them to sound like. We're working class. We have got a lot of energy and anger and whatever in our songs. You cannot take it out of us. It's in our DNA. It's in our blood. So we kind of finished the album off using a drum machine, which I wanted to pull my hair out doing that, because I did not want that, because I wanted our drummer in it. And hence we come out with the Step On It album, which potentially could have been monstrous. And it was released in 16 countries, mind you.
Sure.
And that was unheard of by Australian bands at the time. I think there was like AC/DC, INXS, and look, Chisel, none of those had those releases. We were in 16 countries that wanted it, wanted the album. The problem was, back then they didn't have computers. That was like 81. They only had fax machines, I think, at the time. And our time difference was all out of whack with the Northern Hemisphere. And the people on our promotion, they'd never had a band that wanted, companies overseas wanted to release them. And they kind of dropped it, because it was a hot potato. It was like, oh, God, I don't even know how to ring overseas. I don't even know how to speak in those languages. Japan was releasing us, Germany, all through there, and they were really hot for boss. And it was just because of technology at the time, and because I think Australia was in its infancy, and because hard rock wasn't its thing here. It was like, at that time, it was that new wave sound, lot of the new wave pop stuff was happening, you know, and people who worked in record companies were like, oh, okay, hard rock, it's kind of like, it's Western music, you know, I don't know who's going to handle this one.
Was there ever talk of either touring or relocating overseas to some of those heavy rock markets like Japan or Germany?
Oh, there was so much. We had we had Spain and people from Spain, DJs and people in the hard rock movement in Spain and New York, sending us faxes saying, guys, get over here, you know, like, we've got people asking for your songs and, you know, loving your music. Then there was Better Iron Maiden wanting us to support them. So we supported Iron Maiden, Twisted Sister, anything that came in. Dio, we were on those gigs because they heard the stuff, you know, knew about us, heard about us, and wanted us to open for them. Once again, we were young guys. We knew what we wanted, but we didn't have management. And the management we ever did pick up, once again, we're young guys. When you look back, they were only in their 20s that really didn't know what they were doing. You don't have to have a degree to be a manager. You just have to talk a lot. And we got a lot of lip service, and they weren't delivering. So it was a case of that. We were in a country that wasn't. People didn't. Not the fans. The fans wanted rock. It was the industry people were like, gosh, you know, I don't know about that. It's just a bit below us. And if we, I'm going to ask you. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you later on, but I may as well. Now seems timely. So obviously in '86, when Bon Jovi blow it open to the masses, you must be tremendously frustrated to sit back and see that all happen, and it's acceptable and palatable in Australia at that time. Whereas, you know, when Boss had done the hard yards, you know, not too long beforehand,
yeah,
surely you'd be. If I were you, I would have been tremendously frustrated.
It goes beyond that. I could tell you a little secret, and it's going to be. I actually mentioned it on a blog the other day on Facebook. Back in 1985, 86, I was in New York with Laurie Marlowe, bass player. He was bass player in Boss at the time, and we went over there and to look for management. And we got a guy over there, Roger Vitale, who was looking after Billy Squire, and at the time, and he took us to a recording studio in New York, and it was owned by John Bon Jovi's uncle, and that's what they did. I think it was Power Station or something like that. And we gave him all our songs to have a listen to. Very naive for us to do that.
Wow, is that Tony Bon Jovi? Is that his name?
I don't know. It might be.
Okay.
It was so long ago. And
sorry,
I remember, and we remembered a song coming out that it was, because one of our songs was called Straight Through the Heart on that demo. And the intro was a guitar solo, you know, for Shot Through the Heart, You Give Love a Bad Name. It was exactly our intro of that. And I went, wow, that sounds like the intro to Shot Through the Heart and Straight Through the Heart. And Kev went, yeah. So I started listening to the song more, and then started listening to a few of the songs that the boys Bon Jovi were releasing, and it started to sound very similar to what our new songs were. So we'd actually ripped that solo off, or not ripped it off, but we were influenced by a song called Telstar. It's an old English band song, you know. It was down, 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 down. It's the same thing. And we'd kind of gone, okay, that sounds cool. And we'd done it way before, and that was the one that was the real red light for us. So we found that a lot of our songs were starting to get, not only them, there were other bands we could hear influenced by a lot of our early stuff. And even, so I mentioned the other day, I remembered hearing an interview with Motley Crue, and I did hear, and it was a recorded one, and they said that they were influenced by Van Halen and all these other bands, and they said Boss. And I was quite blown away when this person played me this recording of an interview with Motley's. And then I hear the song Kickstart My Heart. Now, if you listen to Kickstart My Heart, then you listen to Freewheelin' on the Boss album.
Sure.
Well, it starts off the same with the motorbike revving and all that. And it's, you know, and it's very, very similar guitar part. But, you know, as they say, the first step to creativity is plagiarism, someone said many years ago. But it did. We couldn't understand why. Here we are, we're touring constantly through Australia. We've got major supports. We've got 16 countries releasing the Step On It album, and yet we weren't getting played by radio in Australia. And getting out there, we weren't getting basically some of the regionals, some of the small radio stations to play us on the Boss album, but it was mostly overseas that were, welcoming us with open arms. So, yeah, it was a little bit frustrating, you could say.
Step On It, in my opinion, is one of the best hard rock or metal albums to come out of Australia in the 80s. Certainly the best metal album from an Australian band in the first part of the 80s. And back then, the one metal album which all of my friends and I had was the Step On It album. And we used to see you live, and I also saw you with a couple of those big-name supports you mentioned. So many great tunes on that album, and I've got it here next to me. I've still got my copy. Kick-Ass Rock and Roll, Dancing Queen, That Woman, Cry Cry, and my favourite tune is actually Strange Games. And I mean they're as good as anything internationally at the time, and I guess that's important to mention because a lot of the fans got that. We got it, and I guess that the proof of that, as we just mentioned, was the album sold pretty well overseas. What we're going to do, Craig, we're going to take a break. And let's listen to some classic Boss with Dancing Queen. But Craig, what's the story behind that tune, and who was the inspiration for it?
I don't know. It was one of those songs that we were asked by the record company and the publisher to come up with a song that was more radio friendly, and it was just a really, really kind of rock song that was like a very major chord song that with harmonies, and we thought, okay, and it was produced that way with harmonies and all that, and it was just one of those songs that was hoping to get airplay, give us also video coverage. The video clip that went with that actually got an award, I think I was told, for best video under $10,000 at the time. Wow. In England. It was because they were playing it everywhere. Like the video was played overseas, and I think it was Night Moves. A couple of shows would show it here in Australia.
Yeah, I saw it back then on Night Moves. Janet and Bruce got married, didn't they?
Pardon? Yeah.
Janet and Bruce got married.
Yeah, and it worked as far as that. Live, we did it a few times live, but I was personally, and myself and Kev were more into songs like Kick-Ass Rock and Roll, Hard and Fast, more of the heavy groove songs, and sure. That was more us. Every now and then we'd do A Woman Is Hot or Dancing Queen. Actually, Woman Is Hot was a great song. It was really a good song.
They're all great songs. That's a great intro. Thanks, mate. Let's hear Boss with Dancing Queen. Boss there with Dancing Queen. So, Craig, let's go back to May 85, and you were supporting Iron Maiden nationally, shows in Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, also in smaller venues like Canberra, Civic Theatre and Shell Harbour Workers in Wollongong. Mm-hmm. Looking back, you must have great memories of that tour, and as an Adelaide boy, it must have been incredible to play, for your home crowd at Barton Town Hall.
Oh, it was fantastic. Look, I remember the first gig we did with Iron Maiden, I think it started at the Civic. I think it was in Canberra.
Canberra was the first show, yep.
Yeah, and I remember getting on stage there and just letting it rip. It was very cold. It's always cold in Canberra. And I remember Bruce Dickinson come side stage, I think it was halfway through the opening song, and he had this look of fear on his face. We must have sounded good because, like these guys come over and think, we're Iron Maiden, we're the greatest singers on earth. And they got these guys that rock up with hardly any equipment because, we were living out of a van, and we just set up our old Marshall 50 watters, and but it was all in the tunes and all in the passion we had. And it was in our, like I said, it was in our bones to just go for it. And I remember Bruce just on stage just staring, and there was this look on his face. And then after, he just came up to me and went, "Man, where did you come from?" And I went, "What do you mean?" He said, I've never heard you sing live before. He said, "That was fantastic. Your band just kicks ass." And it was a really good compliment. And straight away, we we kind of got on with them. They knew that, hang on, they're just not some slack opening band. This band's actually, serious kick-ass band. And, it was really good. And that whole tour, everywhere we went, it was the Iron Maiden fans. They really accepted us and welcomed us, which was really good. And it really helped break Boss, because the gigs after that, we were packing them in everywhere we went, even after they'd left. After that tour, people just went out there and wanted good kick-ass rock, and it really, really helped. So back then, touring with an act and doing it right, it was really important for breaking you. These days, I notice it doesn't work as much. I get a lot of the bands support big acts, and you go out, you see them 2 weeks later, and they've still got 50 people at their gig.
It's a different era. It's totally different era, isn't it?
So many distractions these days, Different passion.
Any memories of the support slots with Twisted Sister and also Dio in '86, which I think that was the last time I saw Boss, was Sydney '86 with Dio.
Twisted Sister was another great act to tour with. They just were so welcoming again. Their crew was awesome. Just always helping out. And that's one thing I noticed about a lot of these guys from the overseas bands especially. They weren't trying to play with the PA. They weren't, making a set-up side stage. They really, really went to, all lengths to help, the support act. And they were just, all of them were real gentlemen. You could chat to them. They were just like normal people. There was no airs and graces. Dio, I kind of went out and hung out with him. It was like, he was just so much of a god to me. And I remember being at the Siebel Townhouse with him and just chatting and, just this really lovely guy with a heart 10 times the size that he was. He was a very small guy. And just hearing him sing was just like, get out of it. How can someone sing like that? It was so much of a small stature.
It was a top night, and they only did 2 shows from memory in Australia back then. They just did Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, they did 2 shows, and very loud. I think we did have a problem at that gig. We had and I remember it. I remember the vocals were going through the kick drum send, and there was all sorts of problems. I think the sound guy we had, he patched things wrong, and it took a couple of songs before. Apparently, you could hear the vocals out the front. I mean, it sounded good for me on stage because the fallback was perfect, but out front, it was like another world. But, it went over.
Boss also supported Leppard at Salinas, didn't they? Sydney '84. Was that the first time you met Phil Collen?
Yeah, on the High and Dry tour.
Okay. Was that the first time you met Phil Collen?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first time. It was just a quick "how you going" sort of thing. Their manager at the time, Peter Mensch, asked, I think it was Zev Isaacs. He was a record company owner here in Australia, but he had some sort of links with the Peter Mensch management. And I had a message, could you come and meet Peter Mensch, who was Def Leppard's manager? That was straight after we played at Salinas. And he said, I just saw one of the best rock acts I've ever seen, and I think you guys are fucking awesome. And, excuse me swearing, but he said, I want a manager. And I said, oh, really? And that was Def Leppard's manager and also Metallica's manager. And I was like, wow, yeah, let's talk. And he gave me all his details. And after I said, look, we're doing a bit of a tour up the East Coast. After we finished that, I'll give you a call. So I got on the phone and rang him in New York. And he said, Craig, our drummer just lost his arm in Def Leppard. We don't know what's going to happen. We're in a crisis mode. If you could talk to us later on, I'd love to, carry on our conversation where we left off. And so we left it at that for a while. And then I think in the meantime, Boss had kind of was leaving the record company, RCA. There was a few things, and we never really got to actually carry on that conversation, and which was kind of sad. But it was like a few years later, I met Phil again at Phonogram, because we'd signed with Phonogram Records, and Leppard were with Phonogram, and they came out here to Australia to launch the Hysteria album, which was a huge album. And I got chatting with Steve Clark and Phil, and we kind of hit it off, because just into the same music. They remembered us from back then, and they were hearing a couple of songs that we did at Phonogram, and they were like, wow, these guys are pretty cool. And Phil and I kind of hit it off, and he said, I'd love to help produce your single at the time, which was Heartbeat Away. And I think he stayed behind. And while the rest of the guys went back home, he says, I'll hang out. And we hang out and did some recording, and Phil did some backing vocals on it, on that Heartbeat Away song. And that was released as a single. But, we did so much together after that. I ended up going to Los Angeles and hanging at his house and doing some pre-production for the On the Edge album. And then he ended up coming to Australia and co-producing it with me, because we couldn't afford producers in Australia back then, the ones that we wanted. So I was designated that job. If you hear Lizzie Town, I think Lizzie Town on the Edge album was one of the songs I produced it, and Hold On. There's a couple of that I'd actually done, but it was very hard being a lead singer and being a producer in the band, because the politics, you needed a person to come in and be a neutral. So I'd asked, there was a guy brought in who was an engineer, Rob Jacobs, who worked with Bon Jovi, and which is another story, and worked with the Eagles and a few bands like that. And he came in, but he was more of an engineer. He's a young guy. He wasn't really a producer, and he didn't have the temperament of being a producer. He was a guy from LA and more front than Woolworths, but he just wasn't great. He was a great engineer, and to be a producer, you really have to be diplomatic. And he wasn't. He was as subtle as a train smash. And it was great when Phil came along. I rang up Phil and said, Phil, can you come over, and I need someone to help produce this. And he said, no worries. So he hopped on a plane with his brand new baby and his wife and stayed with us, and he just really, really helped so much in that. But it was hard, because Phil wanted harmonies the way they were, and I said, we're going to sound a little bit too much like you guys in that. And because we already had that similar kind of sound, because when they did the High and Dry tour, we sounded more like Leppard than they sounded like AC/DC. We kind of sounded like AC/DC meet Boston, because we had harmonies, and we're starting to go that way. And I think in an interview with Joe, because someone, when they tour, a radio station said, well, how do you feel touring around with the band that kind of themselves? And he said, no, they didn't. I think Poison cloned us. I don't think BB Still did, because they sounded like that before, and because they knew our history. I mean, Phil wouldn't have come on board with us if we were a bunch of clones. He knew from back in the 80s with the High and Dry and the Boss thing that what we were sounding like. So he knew that these guys, we were just in a parallel universe or something. We were just very similar sounding, and that was not because we'd copied them, it's because we'd very influenced by similar acts over the years. And I just tell you one, it was great when we're in the studio. There's a song called Ride On, which a lot of people think sounds like the song Hysteria. And Phil was listening to it, and we were listening to it back, and Phil goes, God, it sounds like Hysteria. I said, yeah, it does, but I'm going to do you, let's do something. And he said, what? I said, on a piece of paper, we're going to write down the song that influenced us to write that song, because I know the song you were influenced by, Phil, and you haven't told me, and I haven't told you. So we wrote on a piece of paper, and we're sitting there with the engineer in between us, and I passed him the song that I was influenced by, and he passed me on a piece of paper the name of the song that influenced them with Hysteria. And he went, bloody hell. And it was the same song. It was We Can Be Heroes, David Bowie.
Sure.
And we're both influenced by that same song that, made that Hysteria song and made Right On for BB Still. And he just shook his head. And I said, yep. He said, well, Bowie, we're into Bowie. And he said, yeah, he told me exactly the same song influenced us. So he knew that we weren't a bunch of guys going out there copying their songs. It's just we had, similar ideas.
Joe was a big Mick Ronson aficionado, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Joe Elliott.
Mock the Hoople.
Yeah. But before we're going to play some BB Steel in a moment, but I just got to rack your brain here. The Sydney metal scene in the early to mid-'80s was certainly healthy. I was a part of it, and there was very much an underground scene with minimal, if any, radio or media support. And bands I've remembered like Godspeed, Tough Luxury, and certainly Surrender come to mind, with Dave Crompton out front, who was also an Adelaide boy. Were there any bands you remember from this time period who you thought should have gone further?
Well, I know Heaven. Heaven would, potentially very much.
They could have taken the world, Heaven, sure.
Well, exactly. And I had a conversation with the drummer. We were in Vegas week before last, Joe Turner, the original drummer. And we were sitting around having a coffee and a drink, and said, you guys, you really, you blew it like we did, because they were in LA and they just partied. They partied hard, but they were doing the right tours. They toured with Judas Priest, and they toured with Motley Crue, and some of the massive acts through America. So everything was laid out for them. They had one of the best managers around, who with Michael Browning. So what happened is, you're young, you're living in LA, and especially coming from Australia, you can get very, very sidetracked. And
sure.
I think that's what happened. And I think the manager should have lived with them and had a club and kept them all in line. Because, living together as a band can be a bad, fatal move.
Yeah.
Playing in a band alone and writing songs together can be really challenging. But living together, unless you're brothers and, you're there for life with blood, it can be challenging. So that's one band that I think could have still done it. And I said to Joe, because apparently Alan Fryer, he's very ill at the moment.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, it's really sad. And I said, look, why don't we put together the guys, Boss, BB Steel guys and Heaven guys, and let's do a benefit gig. I'll sing some Heaven songs because I used to sing in Heaven. We'll do something, raise some money. Should still do something like that for the family.
Sure.
I said I'll be up for it. That's one band.
So is that going to go ahead? Is there some kind of a tribute night for Alan Fryer?
I'd like it to be, but I was just
okay.
My email,
just mooted
it. Just takes someone to really organise it, and
sure.
I just need someone to organise it. I mean, I could get together my guys, not a problem. With the Heaven songs, it's a similar sort of thing. The guys, they did a tour, I think, about 4 years ago. 3 minutes.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, so, there's players there to do it. I know the songs because I helped write, I wrote Suck City, which is Fat City. It was an old Boss song that they kind of borrowed and just changed the name. But, I thought it'd be great, to do something like that. But it takes a person to actually say, yeah, I'll look after it and I'll put that all together. But you never know, that could happen. Other bands that should have made it, geez, I really don't know. I know Dave Crompton as a singer. He's a great singer. He was really good at that metal sound. There were so many really good acts that potentially could have done something, but it was all in the writing, and it was all in the producing, and we didn't really have the producers and engineers in this country that could get us sounding how we really should have sounded, all the bands back then. It was really, really hard. And the record companies weren't supporting that genre of music. So it was really, really hard. It was like trying to, just convert people, into different religions. You just can't do it.
Sure.
Very, very hard.
Well,
it's always been, guitar players and singers, individually, there were just guys out there world class everywhere, all around Sydney. I used to, listen to guitar players that would go, wow, my God, he should be he should be overseas playing in a big band. But it was just people got older, they had families. It was very hard to leave, your comfort zone, in Australia.
I lived and breathed heavy rock growing up in Sydney at this time, like a lot of teenagers, late teens. And I remember reading about the time you were asked by Rudy Sarzo to replace the sacked Kevin DeBrau in Quiet Riot. So Sarzo called you, you mail him over a tape, and then what?
Well, yeah. There was a couple of offers around that time. I remember going to, just quickly, it was at a lunch with Roy Thomas Baker. I was asked catch up with him and a guy called Tom Zutaut, who was A&R for Geffen at the time, Tom Zutaut. And Roy Thomas Baker were here doing, I think they were doing something or looking at Kids in the Kitchen or something here, do a production for them. It was like a pop band from Melbourne. And they heard that song you said you like, Strange Games. And they just went, wow, what this singer, we've got to hear him. And they said, come back to America with us. And we've got a band called Warrant. Maybe, we might be looking at singer too at the time. And I thought, Warrant, I think I've heard of them at the time. It's a guy called Jamie, I think, the singer. And I was once again really young, and the guy who was really working with us, John Bromwell from Warner's, said, you can't really leave the country. You're signed with RCA. They're Geffen Records. You're going to end up breaching your contract and getting your bum sued. But so that, I said to the guys, I'd love to, but my contract, they said, we can work around that, And I thought it was too political. And you're going to understand, I was must have been 19 at the time, going, oh, geez, I don't know what's happening. I'm being told, don't leave, by my mentor, basically, John Bromwell from Warner's, and I believed anything he said because he is a great man.
Sure.
So that was one amazing offer back then to go there and sign up with Geffen, but and be one of the singers in maybe their stable. I don't know what they were doing back then, but then I got a call months later from Rudy Sarzo, and just saying, I was blown away because everyone knew Rudy Sarzo. He was like the rock god bass player from LA, and he said, hey, Craig, I've heard your stuff. Would you be interested in, coming over and trying out for Quiet Riot? And I said, gee, I'd really, really, really love to do that. But I'm already with this band, boss at the time, and signed with RCA Records. And he said, it's a shame, but, we had a bit of a chat about the music scene. And he said, anytime, get on the phone and, love to maybe do something with him. And never happened. But I was always thinking, geez, what would have happened? But I was so loyal to the boss, of course,
That's understandable, but I think you would have made a way better choice than I think they got Paul Shortino, who's also a great singer.
I met Paul the other week.
Really? That's right. He's doing the Las Vegas setup, isn't he?
Yeah. Paul was. It was great. It was all these singers. I think a singer from Michael Schenker Act. There's a few. It was Doug Ulrich, and the bass player from Bon Jovi, and guitar player from Hearts. It was called Rock Vault. That's it.
Nice.
Rock Vault, and it's pretty amazing setup, and really, really, really cool at the Tropicana in Vegas. I recommend anyone to go see that.
Well, I've been talking about playing some BB Steel for about the last 10 minutes, so why don't we do that now? Now, before I do that, I want to say that there was some in the media back in the day who unfairly, I believe, claimed that BB Steel pillaged the Def Leppard sound, yet some of us never saw it this way. Certainly, as we mentioned, the production value, which was so much more, maybe Phil Collen applying the formula partly that works so well for Leppard. Yet the tunes, the songs, the music was all written by you guys, and people forget that.
Yeah.
And top to bottom, the On the Edge album still sounds great today. So, mate, let's cut to another tune. This is my favourite tune off On the Edge, and it is Don't You Love Me and Leave Me. BB Steel there with Don't You Love Me or Leave Me. And Craig, clearly the sound was very international. Did the band ever tour outside of Australia? I can recall the national support, and I know I saw you with Leppard in Sydney in 92. Did the band tour outside of Australia?
With BB Still?
Yeah.
No, we did live in America, and we set up in a big sound studio and did some special shows for record companies, like showcases. That's about all we really did. And it was a shame because the band was sounding really good. But the problem was Kurt Cobain came on the scene at about that point. And the tide for rock, metal, hair metal, whatever it was, started to really, really turn, especially in Australia.
Sure.
Australia started, not so much the rest of Northern Europe and Europe, they love their rock, but in Australia, when we came back and returned, we come back to, bands like Silverchair. And we were like,
sure.
What? There's this guy that looks like Kurt Cobain. He's wearing the same T-shirt, and they're being played non-stop on radio, and we can't get our song. I think we had a song called Big Love we were releasing around that time, and the video was great for Big Love. But I remember Richard Wilkins, who used to be my old manager as a kid with Boss, and he was running MTV, and he rang us up as a mate and said, "Mate, you got to release something that's a bit darker because Big Love's happy, and we're going more that Seattle sound." And that stuffed us because I wasn't going to wear baggy pants, wear my cat back,
or a
jump
flannel
up and down.
And you know what? The Seattle thing destroyed a lot of rock bands, and it took years for a lot of bands. A lot of them hung in there, but a lot of bands died off because of it.
A lot of bands did. The bands that hung in were the bands that were already had massive success.
Sure.
Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, AC/DC.
Sure.
There was, Tesla were kind of still pulling 2,000 at gigs. Some of those acts, Metallica. You had to have there was a transition. Some bands transitioned, say bands like when we came back, we were in Sydney, Powderfinger. Now Powderfinger were going to our support act at Springfields, right? That was a really cool gig in Sydney. And our guitar player's father ended up passing away that week, and we ended up not doing that gig. But Powderfinger were one of those bands that were transitioning. They were into what we were doing, and then all of a sudden they were kind of also were in that indie thing as well. They were doing the uni gigs, and it's something that we should have done. And so Powderfinger were one of those bands that transitioned in Australia and went on to be huge, along with Screaming Jets too, because the Jets were around our time, and we were the same label, basically distribution through Phonogram. And Screaming Jets, they had a serious manager. We didn't have a manager, and they kind of got their song Better I think it was Better at the time, that song Better, in the charts, which I think we had a lot better songs on the BB Still on the Edge album.
What's BB Still up to this year and your current plans for, what are your plans for 2015?
Well, we've got a bunch of killer tracks that we've been writing over the last, even though the Resurrection hasn't really got out there and been pushed by anyone, but I've always been writing, and been writing with a guitar player called Shane Grovac. He Sydney guitar player. He played with BB's for a few gigs in the last couple of years, but he's got a problem with his hand. It freezes up. Because Shane, lovely player, awesome guy. He's had leukemia for about 10 years, and he's been fighting it, but the medication he's on freezes his hands up. And so I think he's great still with his hands freezing up. But he's just happy to do some writing and that, but he's got some great ideas. This year, we've got an album's worth of songs there. This year I'd like to start recording in the studio I've got here in Misty Mountain. It's world-class studio, a big Need console, been restored. Going to do analog recordings. I've rang up Kevin Pratt, original guitar player with Boss, BB Still. He's interested in doing some stuff on the album, and even doing a bit of collaboration. So we just want to get there. And just before you did this call, I was talking to Peter Blyton, who is an engineer, about starting that project off. And so, yeah, it's just ready to go. And it's just getting everyone lining up the planets, because things are so different these days. You just go, get on the phone and say, hey, come on over, let's lay some tracks down. Now,
and hopefully, Boss's Step On It album from 1984 will see release on CD.
Oh, yeah, that's going to happen.
Great.
It's going to have to happen. Yeah.
Good. Mate, I just wanted to thank you for your time today. You are still out there doing it, and I encourage everyone to go and check BB Steel's website at bbsteel.com and discover your body of work, a musical legacy that you have been creating since the late 70s and continues to this day. So thanks very much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Cheers for that. It's awesome talking to you.
Look, before you go, Craig, every guest on our show gets to request an Australian song. It can be one of yours or a song by an Australian band that has a meaning for you. What would you choose?
Look, I love AC/DC, We Salute You.
For those about to rock?
Yeah, AC/DC's We Salute You. Thunderstruck too is another one that they do. It just gets me up and going. Is that a cool tune?
Yeah, why don't we close off with 1981's For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. Craig, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It was awesome speaking to you.